Well, good evening, everyone. It is now Thursday night. You've heard me say almost every week, it's Monday morning and then it's Thursday night in my life. And this week has been no different. It has been an unbelievably busy few days. And I want to thank all of you for the schedule hop that we had to do on Tuesday night. I got notification at the last minute that we got some heavy equipment or delivered to our office. It was supposed to come at 3:30. It didn't come until 5:15, and I knew there was no possible way that I could make it back in time to happy hour. And I wanted to absolutely spend as much time with our guests, and you'll hear about this in a minute why. So thank you for juggling and getting over here till Thursday night, because Thursday night it's usually Dr. T solo. So the only thing I want to talk about tonight in terms of our special sponsors is, for those of you who've been following me for a long time, you know that we do two boot camps a year, Mastering Vaccine Info boot camps per year, usually one in the spring and one in the fall. This last spring we did a new prepper boot camp that was wildly successful over summer and spring type of prepping and canning, and we will have another one this fall in the end of October about prepping for winter time and winter vegetables for canning and all those things that Matthew will walk you through. We decided that it was really important because of the economic changes that are happening right now around us, the hyperinflation of gas and of food, that we thought it was really important to do a summer camp. And our summer camp this time is something that we think is really important for you to know about. I mean, after all, so what the summer camp is really about is the fact that once you understand the past better, that really is the way forward, because it more clearly defines why we are here and why we are doing what we're doing and where we're going to go from here. So this is a 4-week course that we've compressed into 2 weeks to respect your time for summer and vacation and time with your kids. So it's a 4-week course compressed into 2 weeks. And we're going to be talking about understanding the past as the way forward. We'll have 4 classes Tuesday and Thursday night for 2 weeks, beginning July the 19th. Yes, it will be recorded, so if you can't attend the in-person podcast on Tuesday and Thursday night at 8:30 to 10 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, they will be recorded and you'll have access to them for a full year. The first class is with Dr. Kirk Elliott, and some of you may know of him if you follow Scott McKay or if you are following John Michael Chambers. Kirk Elliott is also a friend of mine, and he's going to be doing the history of gold and silver as money. He's also a registered investment advisor, which none of us are. Matt and I are not. We are not talking about telling you what to do with your money or how to invest your money. We're going to be giving you some historical backdrops so that you can find your way going forward. So on Tuesday night, July the 19th, Kirk is going to talk about the history of gold and silver as money and why it's important now. On Thursday night, a good friend of Matt's, his name is Doug Blair. He's going to be talking about the history of constitutional money. He has all kinds of background on this and knows constitutional money and the importance of what real money is versus fiat currency better than anybody I've ever heard. The following Tuesday night, Matt is going to do an entire evening on cryptocurrency. Matt was one of the original miners. He was around when cryptocurrency was first founded, so he knows all the background on it. He knows the do's and the don'ts, the goods and the bads, and he's going to give you a history lesson about cryptocurrency, not what to invest in, because we're not registered investment advisors, but he's going to tell you about cryptocurrency and make you understand the volatility of that market. Then on the final Thursday night of the month, Matt and I are going to be talking about the history of the Great Reset, from the Fabians to the World Economic Forum. And when you see it laid out, when you see about gold and silver and money and crypto and what they're trying to do with the central bank digital currency, you will see the importance of really prepping from a financial perspective. And again, we are not giving advice. We are just giving you historical backdrop and helping you to understand where you need to go going forward. So registration is now open, and you can go and register by going to learningforyou.org/summer camp. Learningforyou.org, learning, the number 4, YOU.org/summer camp. This is an incredible opportunity to really learn history from real experts and knowing it from a perspective that you've not probably heard of it before. It's a four-week course compressed into 2 weeks. It's $299, and your special bonus for signing up is that I've done a 2-hour video with Catherine Austin Fitz, and I know many of you know who Catherine is. She is a registered investment advisor, and she probably knows more about the world economic condition than probably anybody that you could talk to. And between her and Kirk, we're going to bring you some really stellar information. Catherine's going to be doing, and I are doing a 2-hour interview on the 10 mistakes people do with their money. It's fascinating. We'll probably break it down into a little bit smaller bite-sized pieces so that you can get the whole thing, but that will be released on the first day of the boot camp. So enrollment is now open. It closes July the 17th. Boot camp opens on July the 18th, and it's only 2 weeks. It's only 2 weeks. So we really hope that you'll see you there. I don't think you'll be disappointed. In fact, the more that Matt and I talk about what the topics are going to be inside of this boot camp, I personally can't wait to participate in it. So go to learningforyou.org/summer camp, and you can register there now. Enrollment is open until July the 17th. So with that, let me introduce to you today's special guest, author and pastor Douglas Van Dorn. Douglas Van Dorn is a pastor with a Master's of Divinity from the Denver Seminary. He has pastored the Reformed Baptist Church of Northern Colorado since 2002. He helped start the Reformed Baptist Network and has served on boards in 2 associations of churches. Doug has co-hosted several radio shows and podcasts and is currently the host of the Iron and the Myth podcast, which I'm anxious to learn more about. On a personal note, he has been married since 1994, has 4 girls. He's climbed all 54 of Colorado's 14,000-foot mountains, as well as Mount Rainier in Washington and Mount Shasta in California. He's also an avid bicyclist and golfer. But the most important part for me, in why I work so hard to track him down, he is a prolific writer of many books. I own many of them, and has a particular interest and focus on the topic that I'm currently doing a lot of deep dive research on, which is Genesis chapter 6. You know, you guys have heard me talk about it a lot, particularly the Nephilim, Nimrod, and the phrase, as in the days of Noah. I've almost finished his book. I was showing it to him before we went live. If it's all yellow-eared and dog-eared and tagged and all this other thing, I told him that I was absolutely a devotee of his work. And we tracked him down for a long time to get him on here. And then I had to move him from Tuesday night till tonight. So I'm so grateful and excited to have this conversation with you, Doug. Welcome to Happy Hour with Dr. T.
Great to meet you, Sherri. Quite the surprise, and just it's a wonderful thing. So I'm excited for this show.
Absolutely, it's so great to finally meet you. I mean, I feel like I've read so much of your work. I feel like I kind of know you. So it's good to
it's kind of a weird thing because it goes the other way too. Because I've been listening to you for a couple of years. So.
Oh my goodness, I didn't know that. How cool is that? That's very cool. Well, how did you get interested in this topic of the giants and the sons of God in Genesis chapter 6?
Well, I'm a pastor first and foremost, and so from time to time people ask me questions about this passage, and I just didn't have a solid answer that I really felt convicted about. Kind of the typical answer that I would give is that it was sons of Seth marrying daughters of Cain, and that was kind of about it. And so it was not intentional. I was studying for a series of sermons in Exodus, and I came across this article that was really, really fascinating on Deuteronomy 32, 7 and 8, and a little textual variant in there. And the guy wrote a 30-page article on this 3-word textual variant where it says, instead of sons of Israel, it says the sons of God. And he wrote, why is the difference? Why does it matter and stuff? And I thought this was really, really interesting, but I wasn't really studying it, so I just kind of put it away. A couple weeks later, I'm looking at something else again in Exodus, and I came across another article that sounded just like this one. And I thought, oh, is it possible it's the same guy? So I went and tracked it down. Sure enough, exact same guy. So I thought, I got to look more into who this guy is. Turns out he's a PhD scholar of Old Testament languages, got it from Wisconsin-Madison, and he's an evangelical Christian, and he happened to have been on Coast to Coast radio several times, and he had gone to UFO conferences and taught biblical theology from there. And like, this is all stuff that I've just always been interested in. And I thought, well, this guy's worth listening more of. And so he had a book at the time that was being given out online that he called The Myth That Is True. And he just gave it out for free. And I devoured it, just kind of like what you're talking about with my giant book. And he had several, maybe 2 or 3 chapters in there on giants, but it wasn't like a deep dive. And so this was like 10 years ago, and I didn't know anybody else who took his view. And so there's nobody I could talk to about it. So basically what I did is I started writing for myself to try and figure out where it would go and what I ended up thinking about it. And it turned into be the book on giants. And since then, his book, The Myth That Is True, has become a really big bestseller called The Unseen Realm. And his name is Dr. Michael Heiser. So
I'm taking notes here, so if I'm looking down, it's just because I'm taking notes. Keep talking. Okay, that's amazing. That's really amazing because your references that you have in this book. I don't know if you guys can see it with my little background thing on here, but I've got. I mean, I'm just really so fascinated by all the references, and it's so interesting because when I got about halfway through the book, and I went back and I reread the entire book of Joshua, and I reread the entire book of Genesis through completely different eyes.
Right.
Of really looking at it through the eyes of what you have documented here about the Canaanites. The whole Canaanite family that when you're reading the Old Testament and you're reading this, your brain just kind of goes past the Jebusites and the Amalekites and the Ammonites and the Moabites and blah blah blah. All these different things. Your brain just sort of like slides over it because you really don't have any context of what it's all about. But once you really understand what the Canaanites really were in through that part of the world back in those days, and you go back and you reread it, it comes alive. It's a completely different context of reading that.
For sure. I mean, it completely changes the way that you read not just those 2 books, but really most of the scripture. Because what I wanted to do with the book was, and there had been other books on giants that had been put out. Most of them are kind of sensational. A lot of them talk about the second coming, and I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to get into that because I don't know what's going to happen and stuff. But I thought there's a lot of good things I can do in terms of showing people that it's not just Goliath that's in the Bible. There's giants that are really from the beginning in Genesis 6 and Genesis 14 and Deuteronomy 2 and 3 and the book of Joshua and just all the way through the book of Esther, all the way into the New Testament, talking about demons and Jesus and how that fits into the worldview. And really what I wanted to do was show that as much as fun as it can be to kind of speculate about the future, I really wanted to ground people in the fact that Christ has already defeated these creatures, and he's in the midst of conquering them through the dominion that he has through his church today. So
when it says in the Bible, it's Genesis 6, I don't know, it might be verse 12, it's somewhere around there, where it talks about the Nephilim that were in the day and after the flood. And there's a lot of speculation, a lot of things I've written from different authors about what does that really mean? And if God had repented that he had created man because everything was evil and he was going to wipe out everything and start over, how did the Nephilim hang out? How did they end up still being here after the flood?
So that's the number one question I get asked. Everybody wants to know the answer to this. And the best I can do is give you what others have said. So there's 3 or 4 kind of explanations that people have given. The funniest one is probably the most famous giant in the Bible is actually not Goliath. It's a guy named Og, and he's the guy that Moses ended up killing just before the conquest with Joshua. He's the guy that has a bed that's I don't know how long it is, 14 feet or something like that, and has all the lineage, the stock to be a giant. And so the Jews came up with this tradition, fable, I don't know what you want to call it, that he hitched a ride on Noah's Ark and Noah fed him through a hole on the outside of the ark. So you can tell that people are thinking about this long, long ago. I think, the kind of 3 other explanations are that it was a local flood. A lot of people believe that, and that they just survived. I don't really take that view because it doesn't make a lot of sense of what the point of the flood would have been if everybody survived it anyway. Another explanation that I think has a lot of plausibility is that one of the wives of Noah's sons, carried DNA in her body, and so through recessive genes and stuff, they came back that way. I think there's definitely possibility that happened. The problem with that idea is that the point of the flood was to wipe this out, and so would that be a failure if that happened? And so I think kind of the most common explanation that I've heard that makes the most sense, that doesn't really destroy what happened in the flood, is that there was another incursion of angels after the original group. So, anywhere from the Bible and Peter and Jude to Jewish tradition to the Greeks, they talk about how the original watchers or sons of God that were responsible for this event with the Nephilim giants, that those guys were locked up in a place called Tartarus in the lowest part of the earth. And so they're not to be let out until the very end of days when they'll be judged. And so those guys are gone, but is it possible that because God said, I'll never do this again, that another group of them said, hey, let's go ahead and try that and see what happens? And so there's nothing incompatible with Scripture that would prevent that from being the case, and that's the one that I tend to think is probably what happened.
I kind of go with your number 3 and your number 4. I think that's probably true too from the things that I've read. That they said, well, hey, if he's not going to destroy the earth again, come on, let's go do this again. But the idea that it could have been through, Noah had 3 sons, and it was his 3 sons and 3 wives, and we really know nothing about those wives. And
right.
And Noah was 600 years old when the flood happened, and his sons were like 450 to 500 years old. So they've been all hanging out and hanging around with all of the not so savory people on the planet at that time. And I just sort of have this notion in my head, and there's no proof of this, it's just conjecture on Sherri's part, that, Noah was given like 120 years to build this ship, right?
Right.
Given a really long time. And not one other person, not one other convert on the entire world said, he's right, I'm going to follow what he's saying. So I can't imagine that his 3 sons kind of said, oh, man, we got to get on this boat, this smelly old boat that he's been building all this time. And you don't know that their wives may have been, hanging out with like the rich and the famous of the day and, all of those things. And with all of the unbelievable sexual connotations of things that were happening in those days. I mean, just the incest is just when you really sit down and study the Bible, it's like, gosh, there is so much incestual stuff that goes on in here. Job and his 2 daughters, or not Job,
Lot
and his 2 daughters, and all this stuff. It's just like over and over and over again. So could it be that those 3 women, who were the wives of his sons, because, I mean, we kind of know that Ham was not a very savory character, as it was all said and done. And then he has, Cush and then Nimrod and all the things that happened from there, that maybe there was some sort of genetic contamination in that line, So I personally can kind of go with both of those.
Yeah, I don't have a problem with either one.
What do you think? Because you wrote down on with Genesis, what do you think is the most important like storyline that comes out of there that applies to today?
So, I mean, that's kind of the point of the book. I start with Genesis 3:15, really, which is what a lot of people call the first gospel. This is the curse on Satan at the fall, and it basically turns into a promise to the woman that God's going to crush Satan's head, even as he's going to bruise the seed of the woman's heel. And so, what in the world does this mean, the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman? Well, you can look at that in a spiritual way. Jesus kind of talks about this with the Pharisees, calling them sons of the devil. He doesn't mean that biologically, but he means it spiritually. They haven't converted, and they follow after their master. But this storyline with the giants is really a biological storyline that begins before the flood, that erupts after the flood. Probably, my guess is the Tower of Babel with Nimrod. It goes through Moses. It goes through Joshua. It goes through David. and his mighty men who kill not just Goliath, but there's 4 or 5 other giants that are in those same passages. The idea, it actually goes into the book of Esther. So you have to go back for that one through lineage. There's a guy named Agag. Haman. Haman is the enemy of Esther and Mordecai, and he's Haman the Agagite. Well, who's Agag? Who's Agag? Well, he's the guy that King Saul, long before that, refused to kill. And he gives a lineage of that, which is an Amalekite. And you go, well, what is an Amalekite? You go back to Genesis 14, and you find that the Amalekites are among the tribes of giants. And so you got this, it's funny, like word plays with Mordecai, the little man, fighting against, and Esther means like the star. So there's all this weird stuff going on. And then this guy that ends up hanging on gallows that are 70 feet tall that he meant for, for the Jews and stuff. So that's how the Old Testament ends. And then into this comes Jesus starting to fight all these spiritual battles during his ministry. And one of the things people don't understand, like he's fighting these demons, he's casting them out, he's doing all these things to them. They keep calling him the Son of God. And people don't understand that in that ancient world, the universal view, the Jews, of the early Christians, of everybody, was that when the giants died, their spirits did not go up or down. They just kind of stayed around, and they became what are known as demons. So when Jesus is casting out demons, he's actually continuing this warfare as the new Joshua. Joshua and Jesus are the same word, just one's Greek and one's Hebrew.
Wow.
And so Jesus is, he's the new Joshua. Who's getting ready to cleanse the promised land and usher his people in. So when he dies on the cross, and he, as the creed says, he descends into hell during those few hours of darkness, he's not going there to be punished for our sin. He's not going there for any other reason other than to, as Psalm 24 says, barge down the gates. Who's here at the gates? It's the Lord of glory. He's coming in, going to proclaim that he's the victor and he's the king, and they have no power or authority over him. And so when he rises from the dead and he takes the train of captives with him to heaven, he now has all authority in heaven and earth to be able to conquer demonic influences, powers that are in people's life that captive and in slavery, and the paganism of not just the old world, but what's rapidly coming in our own world with the such demonic behavior and beliefs and all this stuff. That's as applicable today as it was in the first century, because Jesus has never lost his power over these creatures. And we just need to know what the gospel is so that we can put them in their place and trust in the true king. So that's really the point of the book. And I don't think you can get any more applicable than what Jesus is able to do today.
Oh, I totally agree with that, Doug. And I think that's been kind of my message for this year when, excuse me, when I've said that, in 2020, it was about masks and fraudulent PCR testing and nonsense of social distancing and all of that. And then all of 21 was about the mechanisms of injury, of how these shots can make you sick or kill you, and all the spike proteins and all that. So at the beginning of this year, I said, okay, Lord, I'm kind of tired of talking about that stuff. Most people have kind of made up their mind by now. They're either going to do it or they're not. They've either gotten the clear message. At least that's how I feel about it. And so what do you want me to talk about? And it was so clear. It was about repent. It's about, the repentance of what we need to do in the gospel of Christ. Really, it's like, you may have made a bad decision and you may have to suffer the consequences of that in your body soma, but you need to make sure that your life and your spirit is aligned with eternity with the Lord.
Exactly.
And so that's, and so sort of my fascination with this, I told you before we started the recording, I don't have, that's why I asked you if that was really if that was like a green screen behind you, or if that was really your office. And he said, no, that's really my books, and there's more downstairs. It's like, oh my goodness. Yep. So I've got probably 20 or 30 books on, various perspectives of the Nephilim and the giants and different writers in my little bookcase behind me. because, when Jesus said, when they said, Lord, Lord, when will we know that you're returning? And he says, well, nobody knows but God, that you will know by the times. And the whole concept of as in the days of Noah, it's like, I don't think that people clearly understand what that means. I don't think they really have a grasp on what was happening and when Sodom and Gomorrah was nuked, by an energy weapon, and when that really happened, and why God was so upset with what was going on that he repented and was sorry that he'd even done this experiment. And so, I look around and I'm finding like parallels to that time that people can really see it. And you talk about that pretty clearly in your books. What are in this book, the giant, this one in particular? What are your thoughts about? I know you said you didn't want to, you don't do any predictive prophecy, and I don't either. But I know that none of us are blind, and we can see
Right.
what's kind of going on around us. What would you say to that issue about as in the days of Noah compared to now?
So, yeah, I mean, when Jesus talks about that, he says, things like they were marrying and giving in marriage, which is really interesting because you can take that if you don't have this worldview, like if you take the Sethite view of what happened, and then it's just kind of, to put it in our language today, Christians marrying non-Christians. Like that's been going on since the beginning of time. And I don't know why you would point out the days of Noah, but in Genesis 6:1-4, if you have this worldview, you see that the marrying and giving in marriage is like pretty nefarious, and there's supernatural stuff going on, and it's not good. Genesis doesn't spend as much time on it as a lot of the other old books like Enoch and Jubilees and Jasher and even some of the other ones. But there's definitely enough there to we know that this is what the worldview is. So at the very least, when he uses that language, I think we need to be cognizant of the fact of what was going on. And then, if we see things that are parallel today, I guess what I would say is, first of all, I think that we do have some kinds of parallels. We have genetic manipulation of animals and hybrids, and like we have laws against these things because they're actually taking place. We don't know exactly how the Watchers, the sons of God, did what they did. It could just be sexual intercourse. I think that's possible because they're called men. They're not Adam, so they're not from our seed, but there's an overlap, like a dog and a wolf. They're similar, but they're different. So I think it could be possible that's what they're doing, but there's also reason to think that they were doing some kind of genetic experimentation. And I write about that quite a bit, I think, in some of the earlier chapters. And so if that's the case, there's some real parallels that are going on today. I guess I would give kind of a warning that it took, like you said, 120 years for Noah to build that ark. So God put up with that for a long time. And if Enoch is to be believed, that this started in the days of Jared, which I think is Noah's great-grandfather. So it was probably going on for a lot longer than 120 years. So, if we're just kind of seeing the beginnings of these things now, I have no idea how long it's going to take to come to the point where Messiah would come because of that. At the same time, I don't think there's really much that's standing in his way from coming at this very moment if he wants to. So I just think we need to, keep our eyes open for the fact that he is going to come back. And there are reasons to think that we're living in a little bit different age than everybody else in the last 2,000 years who have all said in their generation, he's coming back because of this. And, that's true. And it's a good warning. But now we've got so many weird things that are happening that are happening on a global scale that have never happened at any other time. They couldn't happen at any other time. Technologically, transhumanism. I mean, like we were just talking about with the genetic experimentation on animals and men and who knows what else, that we need to keep our eyes open. I would say don't be obsessed with it, but at the same time, know that he's going to come again, and he is the king, and he's still the king right now, and put your trust in him.
Absolutely. It's like, the whole reason that people got these shots is because of fear. And
that's right.
It says more than 300 times, fear not. And I've said this many times in my podcast and when I've been on interviews. I did over 600 interviews in the last year and a half, and usually I do about 30. So it was a lot. And I've said, if God bothers to repeat himself that many times, fear not, fear not, fear not, it must be pretty important. And maybe we should pay attention to that.
And it's funny because I think the biggest place he says that is the first chapter of Joshua and the last chapter of Deuteronomy, which is also to Joshua. So, and what is Joshua doing? He's the one who's going in to conquer these very creatures.
Why do you think, from a historical backdrop, why, of all of the beautiful places on this planet, I mean, and I've been blessed to travel a lot. I've been in, more than 60 countries, closer to 70 actually, and
Wow.
I've been in all 50 states, and I've seen this beautiful, unbelievable arboretum of God's chosen plants and animals and all this other stuff. Why did he focus on that part of the planet, this desert in the middle of nowhere? I mean, I guess it's kind of a crossroads. But, you think about it historically, of all the phenomenal places on the planet, why there?
Oh, boy, that's a huge question. So you were just asking me about our Myth and Iron and Myth podcast. You said, I want to know more about that. So we kind of just talked about this. It'll air in about a month. This is a program that I do with a archaeologist named Dr. Judd Burton and a Hollywood screenwriter named Brian Godawa, and then a great writer on some of these things, a guy named Derek Gilbert. And we were just...
Oh, Michelle, what happened?
He's been having some issues with internet, so this may be an internet issue. Let's just give him a sec.
Okay. Maybe he needs to go out and come back in. Can he do that?
Yes, I'm going to give him a call right now, so he can come out and back in. One moment.
Okay. Well, when we're really getting to something really good, this is what happens. That's what really happens. So hopefully we'll get him back in and we can get an answer to that, because that is a long-standing question that I have had about, I've been in Israel, I've been in Jordan. It's been like, it's an okay place, but it's nothing spectacular compared to a lot of unbelievable places around the world that just have mountains like Switzerland or forests or oceans or things like that. So I hope that we can get him back on and we can hear the real answer to that. Or we're going to have to for sure hook on to his podcast, the Iron and the Myth podcast that he does. I think that's one that I'm going to subscribe to for sure. It sounds really super interesting. The name of it is the Iron and the Myth podcast. Sounds like amazing people who are all part of that. So Michelle's talking to him on the phone, and we'll see if we can't get him back on for just a second. And while we're waiting for him to rejoin us here, I'm going to shamelessly talk a little bit one more time about our summer camp, because it is at the bottom of the hour. We've got about a half an hour left to speak with Doug Van Dorn, our special guest tonight. But if you haven't been to learningforyou.org/summer camp, learningforyou/summer camp, you really do need to go and at least read everything that we've written about it and know what we're going to do. It's a 4-week course. Our 4-week courses are usually $3.99. This is a 4-week course compressed into 2 weeks. So it's $2.99. It is packed full of information that you'll probably be listening to over and over again between now and when we do our fall prepper boot camp, which will be the end of October. So, Michelle, are you having trouble getting hold of him?
He's going to try and join us from his laptop. He's having a connection issue. So he'll be right with us.
Okay, great.
Thank you for your patience, everyone.
Yeah, so I hope that you'll join us. I mean, I think that all the people that have done our boot camps, we've been doing boot camps since 2017, doing our boot camp since 2017, Mastering Vaccine Info. A lot of that material is now available at it's individual courses at learningforyou.org. If you've not been into our site and seen it, Dr. Lee Merritt does courses for us there. We just got an 11-part course on money and gold and the history of the Federal Reserve and all of those from Kirk Elliott, who has a PhD in economics and also a PhD in theology. So he talks through the worldview as a Christian and does a lot of interesting things. He just created an 11-part course for us that is now, if it's not quite available yet, I think Cookie and Matt are in the process of uploading it and getting that ready to launch. I've been talking to other friends of mine that are going to do courses for Learning for You, and I think that that's really super important. So we were talking tonight with Doug Van Dorn, who's in Colorado, who's a pastor and a writer, and we were really talking about this because this book that I got is called Giants, the Sons of Gods, and I'm telling you, if you could actually see it, it's all yellow highlighted and dog-eared and all of that sort of thing. So, oh, good, we got you back. You know, this always happens when you have the most critically important question of the entire interview. You know, the internet gods always have to get in and interfere. You know that.
This is crazy. This is crazy. Anyway, I'm in through my phone, so we're good for a minute.
Okay. Well, we left off.
I don't remember what I was talking about.
The question that I asked was, of all the spectacular, beautiful places in the world, why, why there? Why Israel? Why Jordan? Why there? Why are we doing? Why there? And you were talking about your podcast. You were talking a little bit about, you just had done an interview that's going to air in about a month at your Iron and Myth podcast, and that's kind of where you broke up.
So the short of it is that I think that God has laid out this earth in some pretty interesting ways that are related to geometry and related to numbers and related to latitude and longitude, and there's some pretty strange things that are going on with of Canaan. So just like a really short thing is the place where Enoch says that this took place was Mount Hermon. Mount Hermon is this 9,000-foot mountain in the northern part of Israel that borders Syria and it borders Israel. And without Mount Hermon and what's the Golan Heights, Israel's a dead country because it could steal all the water from it. So this is a really important place. But this, tradition, and I think that where the Watchers came down and did the deed and started the whole incursion with the Nephilim. So they're coming down from heaven there, and there was also a cave at the bottom of this thing, a cave to the god Pan, which they actually said was the gates of hell. And Jesus is actually, when he goes to the Transfiguration and he comes off and they start talking about the gates of hell will not prevail against my church. What's the gates of hell? Well, most likely he's standing at Mount Hermon looking at this cave, talking about the gates of hell, the evil entities that were thrown into Tartarus, that were, cast down and punished in the very place where they came down and started this whole thing in the first place. He's like, this is his mission call to them, that he's here, he's come to do battle, stop what he's going to do. So of all the places on the earth, Mount Hermon is the only place that's at 33 degrees latitude, and if you go by the France, the Paris meridian for longitude, it's also his longitude. And esoteric, kind of the way about numerology and stuff like that, 33 is an absolutely huge number. All kinds of really weird things that I could talk about for an hour that would be along the same lines. The point is that, the place might be like a desert, and like, why wouldn't he pick Iceland, or why don't you pick
Switzerland.
Colorado?
Beautiful, right?
Yeah, Switzerland, some really beautiful place. Why there?
Yeah.
Well, I think there's just some really interesting things that we don't often think about that are associated with the land of Canaan. We could talk about the moon god. We could talk about the Fertile Crescent. We could talk about all kinds of things that are going on in that area of the world. We could talk about the land of Canaan itself being this like original part of the curse, with Haman cursing his son Canaan, and God coming into the land of Canaan and taking that over because that's where they were, and he's going to start, making a name for himself through the very center, of where it all happened. So lots of reasons that are really interesting to think about, but that's kind of the short of it.
Oh, that sounds really fascinating. I'm going to have to track down your podcast and start listening to some of your older things, and you're now looking forward to hearing that going forward. Which, two questions I have about that is about going forward. What happened to the Nephilim? I mean, are they no longer here? What happened to them?
Well, so when they die, that's the first thing that happens to them, is that they become the demons. So they're still here in a spiritual form, maybe en masse. That's the number one thing. Second thing is that when Joshua kicked them out of the land, they migrated. And it seems, I forget where I talk about this in the book. It might be an appendix or something, but they migrated, it appears, north and west. So they go up to Turkey, ancient Asia Minor, the land of the seven churches of Revelation. They were probably gone by then, because when they went there, the people didn't like them. They kicked them out of there. They went farther northwest. They go into France and Germany, modern day. Julius Caesar fights these guys called the Berserkers, who can jump over horses. Same sort of a thing. He finally is able to defeat them. He writes about this in his wars. They go farther up. They go up into Britain. They go into Ireland. All the weird mythology about giants and stuff up there, I think there's a reason for it. Those people didn't like him either. They kicked him out of there. And where do they go from there? They're not completely destroyed, so they cross over the Atlantic and they come down to North America and South America. They're the mound builders of Ohio. They're the mound builders of Britain. And eventually the Indians killed them there. And there's just, in terms of above ground giants, there's not many that we know about, because everywhere they went, these were evil, evil people. Like if you read the law code of Leviticus, and God says, don't do what the people of the land did. If you have in mind the giants, eating blood and cannibalism and sorcery and witchcraft and all those kinds of things, you get a hint for why people didn't like them. And then when you're twice as big as the people of the land and you can do whatever you want to them, there's a reason why everywhere they went, they were killed. So,
are there very many skeletal artifacts of giants that they've found around the world?
So I've been able to track down a couple in modern days that have video evidence, photographic evidence. Both of those have since been taken away from us for whatever reason. And if you go back to the 1800s, late 1700s, early 1900s, we literally have thousands of newspaper articles in almost all 50 states, up into Canada, down into Mexico, detailing that when they went into these mounds, they found these bones. A lot of times they would disintegrate upon contact with the air. Many of the times when you read about these reports, the Smithsonian is somewhere nearby, and the bones end up being given to them. And so there's this whole conspiracy theory about the Smithsonian, and they've taken the bones and they're trying to hide history, and that may or may not be true. But the point is, if you allow for other evidence besides just forensic, and you have to have it in front of your face, we have lots of evidence of bones and other sorts of things like that.
What are you working on now? I mean, I know you say you're a pastor first, which I really believe that. But you're also a prolific writer. What are you working on now?
I'm trying to get a book out on my Genesis series that I did several years ago, because it has a lot of this stuff in it, and it's also No, I really enjoyed that series, and I think other people will too. So it's going to be a 5-volume series, and I've got almost the first 2 done. So that should be coming out soon. I'm always working on different things, and nothing else is really that ready to be published yet. So.
And tell us a little bit about your church. I'm assuming that I'm assuming you kept your church open during all of this nonsense that's going on.
So, yeah, I mean, like I've been in the world of kind of conspiracies because of giants and just because of my own interests. But 2020, and I remember when it happened. I remember when Kobe died, and I thought this is such a strange thing that happened. And then within a month, the reason I remember this is because we were at a Denver Nuggets basketball game, and the very next day they shut everything down. And I just thought, so it was association with Kobe in my mind and the NBA. The NBA is what started the shutdown, believe it or not, from what I remember. And then, it just percolated through every other institution in the country. And so I immediately thought something was really weird about it. But it took us, we shut down like everybody else did for probably a month and a half. And after some period of time, in fact, I think I found you fairly early on talking about this stuff and some other folks. And we opened up, I think, by June, and we said we're not going to shut this thing down anymore. This is just absurd. So, we try to be sensitive to people who want to wear masks and get the vaccine and all this kind of stuff. At the same time, I don't really hide my views about what I think is going on. So it's hard to walk that kind of a tightrope when you're a pastor, but we do the best we can.
Yeah, I said that a couple of times. I'm glad to hear that, and I would assume just from what I've read about you and your other writings and things that would be the position you took. It's the retrospectoscope is like 2010. You can always see things more clearly when you look
Right.
backwards. I think that I'm hoping that going forward, because I feel like a lot of the church has completely failed us on the front end of this. I think that every Sunday should have been a sermon on fear not. I mean, if there's more than 300 verses in the Bible, there's a lot of fodder to pick from. It should be every Sunday for the last 2 years should have been a sermon or something, including fear not. Give your fear to the Lord. Don't bow your knee to the pharmakia and the pharmaceutical industry. Really, if you've got really fear, come and talk to me. Let's pray through it. Let's find out what your real fear is. And if you want to wear a mask, please stay home and watch us on Facebook, because I really don't want my church contaminated with your fear.
Right.
Please don't bring it in here. As soon as you decide you're not going to be fearful anymore and we can pray about it, we can welcome back with open arms, come running back. Just please don't bring your fear in here amongst my people. If I were a pastor, that's what I would have been saying, So I think that that's kind of important, because I think that the next thing that we're going to be seeing, this wave, I've been saying it from the beginning. It's sort of like the Lord sort of put it in my head, and that we're going to see this tsunami of death, and we're already starting to see it. The millions and millions of people. I mean, Steve Kirsch, he's just such a prolific a writer on Substack. And he put out an amazing article yesterday with a survey that shows that he believes there's over 750,000 deaths already in this country, and more than 5 million people that are unable to work because of these shots. And my own business partner has 63 people close to him that died from the shots. And I think what's going to be happening, seriously, Doug, in the very near future, because it's already arriving, it's like a big tsunami.
Right.
We're going to see this tsunami of death. And right behind it is going to be a tsunami of regret, of people who go, wow, I know 4 or 5 people. I know 10 people.
Right.
I got the shot. Am I next? And I hope that the church is going to be there as part of the great revival to bring those people back to a place of fear not.
Yeah, I've wondered for a long time, Sherri, like, why would God want me to talk about giants and write about this and learn about the divine counsel and the supernatural realm and some of the things that I think about that a lot of my friends don't think about, and they think I'm crazy, and sometimes they think I'm worse than crazy. And it's frustrating and it's hard. You know the same thing. But I want to be here for people on the other end of this thing, whatever that's going to look like. I'm not sure. I'm preparing for the worst, not really hoping for the best, because I don't know that there's going to be a best that's to be hoped for, but it's always possible. But I want people to know that there's at least one. I think there's more than just one of us out there that are pastors that want to help people and want to, we're trying to stand up as best we can to what we believe is taking place in the world and do so in a way that's faithful to Christ and to His church, and say that it's not the whole thing that's been compromised, even if a lot of it has been.
And so we've got just a few minutes left on our podcast here tonight. What would be your closing message you'd like to leave to our listeners here? We have a lot of people that listen, and then thousands of people that listen on the follow-up.
Boy, I don't know. That's a great question. I mean, in some ways, this doesn't happen often, I'll tell you, because when people talk giants, they just kind of want to go into all the interesting things about it. And you've kind of let me give what, to me, is the most important thing about it. Look, and you said the same thing already in this podcast too, Sherri, that we're in a really, really crazy times. I agree with you. I think fear is probably the number one thing that has taken hold of people in the last couple of years. I don't even think it's close. That fear has created a whole bunch of other, very bad things, anger and kind of insanity about what we're doing with our life and how we're treating other people and dealing with, the world around us. And I think that the more information that you have, the better able you're to deal with the fear, because it's not a secret. It's not a conspiracy theory. It's something that you're able to be rational about. As long as you're able to face it head on, what's happening to your friends, to your family, to yourself, whatever it is. Even if you're the one who's taken 4 jabs or whatever, and you're starting to feel sick, and you don't know what's going to happen to you, then you need to trust in the Christ that has conquered supernatural evil, and He's conquered human evil, and He's the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, and there's no greater hope in this world than Him and what He can do for us and saving us now and giving us, happiness and joy in the midst of horrible suffering that we have to undergo. And, I want people to know that.
Yeah, that's the most important thing. It's the most important thing, because if we make bad decisions with our physical body, sometimes we have to suffer the consequences of that.
Yep.
You fall off you're doing a crazy thing and you on a motorcycle and you didn't have on a helmet, and sometimes you have to suffer the consequences of what happens to your body. But you've got one Jesus, one Christ, one that says, no one comes to the Father except through belief in me. And it took me a long time to get really there. I mean, I grew up in a very fundamentalist Christian church, and then I was Lutheran for a while, and then I was New Agey for probably a decade, and I studied a lot of like Sufism and a whole bunch of different things. And then finally, the Lord just like smacked me upside the head, and I go, okay, you're right, Uncle, I'm all in. And so I've had a different sort of a walk, so I can understand those sorts of things. But once, the Lord Jesus really grabs hold of your heart and shakes it really hard and squeezes it and loves you, and you know how much you're loved, you just can't do anything but walk in that love, And
it's there for anybody who will turn to Him. I mean, it doesn't matter what you've done to yourself. It doesn't matter what you're feeling. He it's not the mark of the beast that you take the vaccine or something like that. It's not an unforgivable sin. Like you said, you can pay consequences for it. You might. I hope that some people don't. But it doesn't matter. We're all going to die anyway. We all are going to face our Maker. And whether it's in a month or 40 years from now, we all are still going to have to face these consequences of our own sin. So.
Exactly. Well, at the end of our podcast, what we do with Happy Hour, because Happy Hour is, Happy Hour got started in the middle of 2020 because I told Michelle things were so dark, we had to do something happy. So she said, well, let's do a happy hour. And so it's sort of a double entendre, right? I mean, people thought we were going to come and have a glass of wine and sit around and complain about the planet. And instead we co-opted everybody to get together to do a Bible study. So it was kind of the way it started. And so I always ask our guests at the end of our happy hour if you'd be so kind to lead us in prayer as we close tonight.
Oh, sure. I'd love to do that.
Thank you.
Heavenly Father, what a great opportunity and quite the mind-blowing email and phone call from Sherri to be able to be here tonight, and your providence is just so interesting to me. Thank you for her work and the things that she's been doing, and her courage to stand up when so many are not, to say the things that not only she believes are happening, but are happening. And Lord, I would pray that you would bless her and the things that she's doing. I also pray that you would give those people who are hearing this, that might have had their ears perked here in the last couple of minutes, that might be struggling with people that they've lost in the last couple of years, maybe in themselves as well, that you would show them your goodness and the way that they can be comforted, your kindness, because of what you did in sending the Lord Jesus Christ to us, for him dying for our sins and being an atonement for us that satisfies your wrath, and for him being the King that has conquered evil and Satan, and him being the resurrected Lord who is alive and gives life to those who call upon him. I pray that your word would be powerful and that it would reach into dark hearts and that it would transform them and bring them to life and cause them to know the joy and the happiness that they can have, not just in a happy hour, but throughout their life, even in the midst of suffering and the things that we're still going through in this world today. And I ask that you would bless these things in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much. It was worth tracking you down for. And being persistent, I mean, I kept saying to Michelle, have you reached him yet? She goes, I can't get hold of him. I'm trying. So maybe the next time.
It's all in God's timing, I guess.
It's all in God's timing, exactly. So thank you so much, Doug. What we'll do for sure is we'll put your podcast connection, into the show notes, and I personally can't wait to start listening to some of your materials. It just is so fascinating. It just builds upon everything that we've already been talking about.
Yeah.
So, I think that'll be really, really fun. And we can see Michelle's got your website up there, DouglasVanDoren.com. And so we can follow you and probably your works and the other books that you're going to be coming out with really soon. So when I close out our podcast, every time, whether I do a pre-recorded podcast, no matter what I'm talking about, or if it's something that we're doing live, I always like to close with one of my favorite verses from the Bible, which is Romans 12:12. Which is rejoice in hope, be patient in trouble, and be persistent in prayer, because it sort of covers everything. Be hopeful, trouble will come, but be patient and lean into the Lord. Just lean in. Sometimes, these troubles come along to kind of test you, to see how willing you are to just surrender and lean into him. So with that, thank you so much for everything that you're doing, Doug. I can't wait to have another conversation with you about all these different things that we're talking about. And I'm thankful that we finally tracked you down. So thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Let's do it again soon. I love talking about any or all of these subjects. So.
All right. Sounds so great. So good night, everyone. Take care until we see you again. Have a good evening.